So where we left off last time, of course, was we really finished UV unwrapping the models here, right? So what we want to do at this point is, you'll notice I still haven't mirrored these over, right? So we are still in that place where I've kind of UV unwrapped half of it. Now, remember, this is one of those things where you could have the whole model together, you could unwrap the whole thing uniquely so that you don't cut it in half, you don't have half deleted and mirrored over. For us, though, we're trying to keep it a little simpler and easier, just so we can kind of maximize the benefit of a lower resolution texture. Trying to keep that in mind that, some of the devices we're using aren't as robust as they could be. But it's totally legitimate to actually have UV unwrap a whole model and have the UVs not overlapping each other. We're just choosing to go this way because it'll work better for us. So in this case, since both objects are UV unwrapped, right, we can kind of see our nice distortion grids on there. What we can do is we can start to kind of go and mirror these over. Now, of course, you could do it through your blue wrench, right? We just go right to blue wrench. We go to add modifier mirror, right? That'll work fairly well. But remember, one of the things you can, of course, also do is click on your little V, right? Remember, there's that little V right kind of next to your outliner right there. You can click on that. And, of course, if you're in object mode, right, 4 for object mode, remember, there is still in the edit menu, right? Because if I click on the V, it opens these little tabs here. I click on edit. If I close up B surfaces, you'll see there's auto mirror here. Now, that's really just applying the mirror modifier with a couple of other options. But you could actually just kind of tell it to apply mirror, hit auto mirror, and it'll properly mirror it over and sew up the center seam for you, right? So that's a great quick way to kind of do that if you need to, right? And then, of course, we can go to this object to do the same thing, hit auto mirror. Although, of course, like I said before, if you want to go to blue wrench, add modifier, mirror, you could do that. You just have to remember to also eventually apply this. So you'll have to either hit apply all, or remember, if you click on the little V right here pointing down, there is an apply menu there. So you've got a couple of ways to do it, right? And then you'll see that this is a fully kind of mirrored over. I could turn on my regular shade instead just to kind of see if there's any seams, right? Somebody just want to double check that there's no kind of, looks like a seam down the center in terms of, not a red seam like we're creating for UV unwrapping, right? But an actual, like, where it looks like there's actually a shading difference, right? Where it almost looks like the model's going to pull apart. In this case, we already had that laid out well, so we knew it was going to mirror pretty well for us. But just keep in mind, right, if you kind of see any kind of difference in shading where it like, kind of looks like that it's not smooth shading across, like it's flat shading across the part of your model here, keep in mind that you might want to just make sure to kind of merge those together. Pretty easy to do, but yeah. So now that's all mirrored over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the sculpting workspace, right? So that's UV editing. We just kind of needed to do some mirroring just to kind of have the models over in half again. If you turn your texture back on, you'll see that the actual UVs are on both sides, right? So you actually see they're kind of overlapping here, right? In this case, they're kind of on top of each other, but particularly when you do island select, but technically you'll see that it's actually, the UVs are on top of each other. So the leg UVs here are on top of the leg UVs for the other leg. That way you get the same texture on both sides, right? That does mean, however, you can't asymmetrically texture, right? So whatever sculpting or painting you do, it's going to be identical on both sides, right? And for us, that's fine. Generally, oftentimes, you'll have that anyways. But for us, we're just trying to keep, like I said, we're trying to get the most bang for buck for us here, particularly since, our devices aren't as robust as they could be. So just keep that in mind, though, that these UVs are actually on top of the other UVs. So both legs are on top of each other. Both hands are on top of each other, right? So see if I grab that shell and I move it around, you'll see how the top hand, actually in this case you can see specifically since it's not a seam touching the center, you can actually see that they are on top of each other, right? So oftentimes, in particular, if they're not kind of touching the center here with no seam there, you'll notice that you can pull them off top of each other. So just keep that in mind. Just want to remind you that a little bit. All right. I'm going to switch myself back to this one right here. And I'm going to go to the sculpting workspace, right? Remember there's modeling, and that's where we kind of did our modeling. UV editing workspace, kind of where we could UV and edit and see our UV editor. But there is a sculpting workspace. Remember these very tabs at the very top, right? Sculpting, right? I guess it's our sculpting workspace. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to go to 4 for object mode for the moment, that we do need to apply a specific modifier again, right? So in this case, I'll select the body, and I'm going to go to blue wrench, right? Because remember, we have our outliner, which is this top kind of menu area here. Not menu, but like kind of workspace area. Not workspace, but it's a viewport, I guess, some kind of section, right? Remember, that's just your basically your list of your objects in your scene, right? But below that, remember, is all your kind of properties for a bunch of different categories. And remember, that blue wrench is where you can add your modifiers, right? That's kind of where subdivision surface is at. That's where mirror's at. So you just, click on that Add Modifier button with the body object selected, and you'll see right below mirror is multi-resolution, right? Multi-resolution. What this does is this gives you the ability to high-resolution sculpt. Because what we could do is we could subdivide the model. That means taking each quad, dividing it into 4 smaller quads, right? And of course, it'll apply the rounding that a subdivisional surface does, so it kind of averages the positions of the vertices to round the shape off. But you could subdivide it multiple times to get it up to hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons, right? Significantly higher than our base mesh is. And you could actively go up and down the levels and work non-destructively. That's why it's called multi-resolution, because it's really giving you multiple resolutions, right? And you can work at different levels of resolution when you need to kind of maybe do some broad shaping, go back to lower level again. You need to do some higher level detailing, go back to higher level. So it's a non-destructive way to add a lot more geometry to do sculpting. So we want to apply that multi-resolution modifier. We can see it there now. And you'll notice that it's at 0. And if you want, you can turn the eyeball off for gear, just to kind of see the body itself. And you'll notice in the multi-resolution modifier in the blue wrench, there's a button called Subdivide, right? Subdivide. This is how you subdivide the mesh, right? How you add new levels of subdivision. Now, if you need to and you want to, you can always, of course, go right up here, right? We have these, see, kind of right up here at the top. In the viewport, though, like so right here, where my cursor's at, right? You can kind of see that where I'm at. Remember, there's wireframe, of course, right? And there is shaded, and that's what we're going to use for sculpting. There's texture. We'll see that a lot more when we do texture painting, which we'll get to next week. The last one's rendering. We'll see that when we do rendering in 2 weeks. But I'm going to click back on that one. It's kind of the solid white ball, right? Now you'll notice there is a V kind of at the end of these, this V right here. You can click on this, and this actually gives you options in sculpting for matte cap. You can actually turn this on during regular modeling, right? So you don't have to wait for sculpting to do this, but technically you could leave it alone also. But in sculpting, it applies matte cap instead of studio, which gives you kind of a slightly different lighting arrangement on the surface. You can click on the ball right here, though, right? Because there's studio. Flat will kind of just flat shade it, right? But you can click on that ball, and it actually gives you other options. I kind of like that one, but if you're working on like a car, you do car paint, so you can get some shiny stuff. Some of the things you can see when you do hard surface modeling next semester. But you have kind of different wax looks too. And I kind of like that one right there. But you can use this or not, right? It's kind of up to you. It'll have that default kind of gray matte cap on it anyways. But it's totally up to you what you need and what you want to do. All right. Of course, you can also go to the little kind of overlapping circles. One's kind of white and one's kind of empty. And you can click on the V. And you'll notice that you can actually tell statistics to be on. And in statistics, you'll see that you can actually, it'll actually show your polygon counts here, right? Once again, you don't really have to have that on, but it's not a bad idea to kind of know that you can click on the V right here, and you can turn the grid and floor off or on if you want to, right? And you can turn statistics on, which gives you your actual like triangle count here. But once we start to subdivide stuff, right? Once we start to actually go here and subdivide, now we have level 1. And you see how now instead of being 10,000 triangles, it's 42,000 triangles. I could subdivide again, and now we're at level 2, and it's 160,000. I could subdivide again, and now we're at level 3, and we've got 679,000 polygons. Now, when you play video games and you watch movies and you see the wrinkles and all those kinds of really fine level details, that's what they do to get this, right? They do this multi-resolution sculpting, right? Oftentimes it'll be in ZBrush. Obviously, Blender is pretty awesome at sculpting as well, but ZBrush is kind of like the 800-pound gorilla for sculpting. But Blender, you know, has pretty nice sculpting tools as well. And I know they've got big plans to improve it even more in the 3.0 series, which I'm looking forward to. But there's already some pretty strong sculpting tools in here. And the way to get using them is multi-resolution mesh, right? You'll notice that you can go down these levels, right? So you see how I can go back down levels and work at those different levels, right? So a big part of starting to be able to sculpt is to apply the multi-resolution modifier. And that's just a modifier. So you go blue wrench, add modifier, multi-resolution. There we go. Sculpting workspace is a great place to be in it. Now, just like we have 1, 2, 3, 4 for vertex, edge, face, and object selection modes, particularly if we're using industry compatible, which we are, you also have 5 for sculpt mode. In fact, there's a whole button for it right up here towards the top left corner, a little bit below File and Edit. It says Object Mode. We see Object Mode's 4. We see Edit Mode's 1. 2 and 3 do the face and edge edit modes. It just doesn't have it in there. And you'll see right below Edit Mode is 5 for Sculpt Mode. In fact, later on we'll see 8 for Texture Paint. These are all nice quick keys for it, and I'll use these to go back and forth when I'm kind of need to turn stuff off and on for that. So there is actually, in that little kind of mode menu area here, more than just selection modes, right? We've been using it basically just for selection modes, object, face, vertex, edge. But you also have sculpt and texture paint modes. 5 is the quick key for sculpt mode. And you'll notice all of a sudden that I have a bunch of sculpting tools here now, right? This is the cool thing about sculpting workspaces. It kind of sets you up to kind of have the different kinds of shading, right? The matte cap. And generally, when you first come to it, you'll have sculpt mode on as well, right? And these are all your sculpting tools. Now, with a sculpt tool on, you'll notice that we can't apply mirror. You cannot use the mirror modifier with multi-resolution, right? Fortunately, we generally don't need at this stage to do that, right? We've already got a good base mesh. We're just going to do some detailing. I will often do a good base mesh model and then leave some parts for sculpting. I'll do a multi-resolution sculpting pass, then retopo that, and then UV unwrap it, and then do kind of the more high detailed pass for it. We just didn't do that for this model. It's a little tricky to do for our class, so we just kind of omitted it, right? But you'll notice that when we have a sculpting tool on here, and it really applies to any of your manipulators, tweak, move, rotate, scale could also use this. But you'll see when you have a sculpt tool on here, and there are many, and you're in sculpt mode 5, you'll notice we have these guys up the top here, not just options, but remesh, dyno topo, and then you'll see there's an XYZ with what looks like a butterfly being cut in half. That is symmetry. So you'll notice that even though you can't get mirror symmetry, where if you were to loop cut and extrude, this kind of symmetry won't work, it does work for shaping and sculpting though, right? So if you ever need to make some shaping changes on something, but you don't have a mirror modifier applied, just have move, rotate, scale, tweak, or when your sculpting tool's turned on, and make sure to turn on the axis, right, that you want symmetry on, in this case X, right? And now you'll see my brush shows up on both sides. Now this default brush at the top is your draw brush. Now, if you hold down, if you hit S, you can actually move your brush up and down, right? So if you just hit S on your keyboard, move left and right, it'll make your brush size bigger or smaller. But your bracket keys, right? The keys that are kind of right in between P and your slash, kind of your backslash, right? I think backslash, yeah. There are bracket keys, right? They look like parentheses. Those will jump you in units of 10. Or actually, I think 8. It's some kind of unit. But your bracket keys will also jump you up in brush size as well, right? Remember, you got those bracket keys. They're kind of hanging around right around P, backspace, enter. Of course, S, if you just hit S and left mouse drag, that'll adjust your brush size as well. And we've got draw, right? That's our kind of default brush. Now, you'll see up here at the top, we have Sculpt Controls here. And we're not going to see all of these today. We'll see some more later on as we do some more lectures. But the big ones today, I remember we did this on our crab creature, so this should be pretty familiar for all of you. Remember, whatever your brush is on, you have strength right here. That's the amount it's going to sculpt. You have this one right here, which is strength pressure. That's if you're using a Wacom pen, which we don't really have those in this class, so you can turn that off if you want. And of course, there's a plus and a minus. Plus means it's going to pull the geometry away off the surface, outward. Minus means it's going to push it in, right? Now, the cool thing is there's some quick keys for that, though, right? So if I want to, kind of with a lower strength here on the draw brush, the very top one, I can just left-click drag to kind of pull out a little bit of shape for that pectoral. Now, there is a brush way down here. It's the first of kind of the orange brushes. It's called Smooth. I can click on that, and that strength is set really high. Now, one of the things I like to do with my brushes is I don't like their strengths to be linked. So remember, in our properties menus over here, right, we're in the blue wrench for the multi-resolution. But the very top one, kind of when you get to the white buttons up here, there's one that looks like a screwdriver and a wrench, right? Very top one. That is your properties for your tool. I like to click on that one, and in this case, it's actually, you can see it's already off, but you might want to make sure it's off, right? It's kind of, it looks like two paintbrushes. It's next to the kind of one that looks like a bullet and a bullseye, right, which is your strength pressure. It's that one right there. That's unified strength. If you turn that off, what that does, so I like turning that off right there. What that does, it makes it so that I can set the strength for smooth to be quite low. And you see how it's independent of the strength I have for my other brushes. So if you go to the screwdriver and the wrench, and you turn off the two brush ones for strength, that means that your brushes can all have their own unique, independent strength values. I like that. It's neat to have that as a feature to turn off and on. You just might want to make sure it's off, depending on how you want to use it. I always like to point that out. And now you'll see if I click on Smooth, I can just come in here and I can left-click drag, and it kind of softens it. So what Smooth does is it basically tries to kind of de-wrinkle it, right? It's kind of like if you take a piece of paper and you crinkle it up, right? You crumple it up. Smooth is like if you were trying to take that crumpled piece of paper and you try to flatten it back out with your hands, right? You try to kind of get rid of as many wrinkles as you can. You try to flatten it back out again. It's not exactly flattening it, but it does kind of try to uncrumple stuff, right? So it's a great way if you go a little too far and you want to soften up an area to use that. Now the cool thing is there's actually quick keys for this, and they're pretty universal in all kinds of different software. So if I go back to my draw brush, I don't have to actually hit minus if I want to push in, right? If I do, if I go to draw brush at the very top and I click on the minus right here, you notice it pushes in. See how I can kind of define that shape a bit better there? I can define that clavicle shape a bit better there too. The thing is though, so you can see as we start to do this, we can define shape that we couldn't do before, right? Now the nice thing though is Shift is the quick key for smooth. So you see how there's a little bit of kind of a slight crease there, very subtle. But if I hold down Shift, because Shift is your quick key for smooth, and I left click drag, you see how you can kind of soften that out? Just like I go up here and hold down Shift, and you see how it kind of softens that a lot? See how the back end kind of fades more? But also, you can do the inverse brush function, right? The minus, by holding down Control. Right? So I can just left click drag to kind of pull out, Control to push in, and then I hold down Shift to kind of smooth and soften. So I can go in here and I can just hold down Control to define the neck area a little bit better. So I'm just holding down Control and then left mouse button just to move my brush. I can hold down Shift to soften and smooth it out, right? So I can kind of make that just smoother. But Control will automatically inverse, and then Shift just allows you to kind of soften that effect out. A little more Control left mouse button. And all of a sudden, you see how we can start to define kind of forms, right? I could put some obliques right here just by left click Sculpt. Maybe Shift left mouse button to kind of soften up there. Control to inverse, right? And so I can kind of define that armpit detail a little bit better there. Maybe even start to define a little bit of muscle tone here. Shift for smooth, because you always want to kind of do a bit of a smooth pass in areas just to soften it a little bit. I can hold down Control here, left mouse button to just kind of develop a little muscle tone there, a little bit of Shift for smooth. Maybe a little Control left mouse button. Then a little bit of Shift left mouse button to soften it. And all of a sudden, you see how we can start to develop this more. Maybe a little bit of Control to develop this a little bit better. Shift for smooth. And all of a sudden, you can see how we're defining a little bit more form and detail here. So left mouse button will just do regular sculpt. Control will automatically do your negative. It inverses your brush. It actually inverses it. So if you had negative on, it'll set it to positive, right? But generally, positive is kind of the default for the brush function. Negative is the inverse. But generally, you're either pushing the polygons in along the normal direction or pulling them out along the normal direction. And Shift just kind of softens the whole effect, right? It kind of crumple. But that's just your draw brush, and then your smooth, but Control, right? Even down here, Control left mouse button, so I can kind of define a little bit of that there. Control is automatically going negative. It's inversing your brush. Shift smooths, so it softens, so I can kind of blend that better. And this is just kind of the starting point for how sculpting is going to work, right? I can go back up here, left mouse button drag to kind of define that brow ridge a little bit better. Maybe Control to kind of define that a little bit more there. Maybe a little bit of left mouse button to bring out the cheekbone a little bit more. And Shift for smooth. But at the end of the day, it's all about just getting a multi-resolution modifier applied, subdividing it a couple times to get you started. Make sure you're in Sculpting workspace, and you've got probably, at least for right now, Draw. Crease is actually really cool. We'll explore that later in the week. We'll start to see how we could put textures on them and stuff like that, and control strokes. There's more we're going to show. And then just kind of understanding, right, strength and Control for inverse, Shift for smooth, and that you just use this to define form. And then, of course, page down and page up can actually go up and down your resolution levels, right? So see, page down goes to level 0, and you can see a lot of that detail is lost. Page up goes back up again. And so you see how you can actively go up and down the different resolution levels and sculpt at those different resolution levels non-destructively. And you see how all of a sudden I'm starting to get muscle tone here? And we could actually start to develop and pull out muscle form. We could do wrinkles, right? We start to develop forms and shapes we didn't have in our base mesh. All right, so I think that'll be a great place for me to stop for that one.